The restaurant was buzzing with energy that Saturday evening. The air smelled of fresh bread, sizzling dishes, and a hint of coffee. Waiters and waitresses moved quickly between tables, balancing trays filled with food and drinks, their faces a mix of concentration and tired smiles. In the corner of the room, under soft yellow lights, stood a small piano, its polished wood gleaming. Most people noticed it but paid it little attention, thinking it was just a decoration. Only a few thought of the music that could come from it. The waitress in the restaurant was quiet. She moved with a natural grace, serving customers with polite smiles and careful attention. Her uniform was simple, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She had been working here for a few years, and everyone knew her as friendly and dependable. But what the guests did not know was that she had a secret. Hidden beneath her ordinary exterior was a talent that few had ever seen. She had played the piano since she was a little girl, spending hours each day practicing, learning to make the keys sing. But life had led her to this job, and she played only for herself and those few close to her who knew her story. On this particular evening, the restaurant was especially busy. A large group of guests had come in, laughing and chatting loudly. They were dressed well, talking about their plans for the weekend, sipping on wine and cocktails. Among them was a young man who noticed the piano in the corner. He leaned over to his friends, a mischievous grin on his face. "I wonder if anyone here can actually play that thing," he said, loud enough for others nearby to hear. His friends laughed, and one of them jokingly added, "Hey, why don't we ask that waitress to play something for us? I bet she can't. Probably just works here and doesn't even know how to touch the keys." The first man laughed and called the waitress over. She approached, polite and calm, though she sensed the playful challenge in their tone. "Excuse me," he said, his voice teasing. "Would you mind playing something on the piano? Just a little tune for us?" The waitress looked at him, a faint smile on her lips. She could feel the eyes of the whole table on her. There was a mix of curiosity and amusement in the room. Some guests leaned back in their chairs, smirking, expecting a small, awkward performance. For a moment, she hesitated. It was unusual for someone to ask her to play in the middle of a busy restaurant, especially for a group that didn't know her. Her mind raced through the possibilities. She could politely decline, but something inside her nudged her to say yes. Perhaps it was the way they were laughing, the energy of the room, or maybe a quiet desire to show a part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "Sure," she said softly. "I can play something." The group of guests erupted in small cheers, thinking this would be amusing. They didn't know the storm of music that was about to unfold. She walked to the piano, her steps light but steady. The room seemed to quiet down slightly as people sensed something different in her movements. She pulled out the bench, sat down, and positioned her fingers over the keys. The piano felt familiar beneath her touch, almost like an old friend welcoming her home. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, taking in the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the warm glow of the lights around her. She centered herself, preparing for what was to come. Her first notes were soft, almost hesitant. A few of the guests chuckled quietly, thinking she was as inexperienced as they had assumed. But there was a subtle precision in her fingers, a rhythm that hinted at deeper skill. The tune began simply, a gentle melody that floated through the room. It was enough to catch the attention of a few nearby diners, who paused mid-conversation to listen. As she continued, her confidence grew. The notes became smoother, more deliberate. She wasn't just playing a song. She was telling a story, one that wove through the air and into the hearts of those who listened. Her hands moved with fluidity, each finger knowing exactly where to go, creating a melody that was both familiar and surprisingly captivating. The guests leaned in, their laughter fading into silence. Some exchanged glances, realizing this was no ordinary performance. The waitress allowed herself a small smile. She had been waiting for a moment like this, even if she hadn't known it. The energy of the room, the playful challenge, and the expectant eyes of the guests fueled her music. It was as if the piano and she were speaking together, sharing a secret language that only those who truly listened could understand. The melody grew richer, filling the space with warmth and emotion. The group of guests, initially joking and mocking, now sat in stunned silence. They hadn't expected this. The music was beautiful, moving, and unexpectedly powerful. Each note seemed to carry a piece of her story, a fragment of her passion and dedication. They could see the concentration on her face, the gentle movements of her hands, and the quiet joy that came through in every chord. It was a performance that no one would forget. As the song ended, the room remained quiet for a moment, as if everyone needed time to process what they had just heard. Then, slowly, applause began to build, soft at first, then louder as more guests joined in. The waitress looked up, slightly surprised, her cheeks tinged with pink. She had played countless times before, but never for an audience like this, and never in such a public, unexpected way. The applause was genuine, heartfelt, and it touched her deeply. The guests who had called her over looked at her in awe. Their earlier teasing smiles were gone, replaced by admiration and respect. They realized they had underestimated her, judging her by her job and her quiet demeanor. It was a humbling moment, not just for them, but for everyone watching. The music had spoken louder than words ever could, breaking through assumptions and revealing a talent that had been hidden in plain sight. Other diners nearby had turned their attention as well. People who hadn't been involved in the challenge stopped to listen, captivated by the sound. The atmosphere of the restaurant shifted. It was no longer just a place to eat and chat. For a few minutes, it had become a small concert hall, and the waitress at the piano was the star. Her music united everyone in the room, creating a shared experience that was both surprising and beautiful. When she finally rose from the piano, a gentle smile on her face, the room was still filled with applause. Some guests stood, clapping more vigorously than others, cheering and whistling. She nodded politely, thanking them with a soft voice. It wasn't about the attention for her. It was about the music, about sharing a piece of herself with those who were willing to listen. That evening, the waitress returned to her usual duties, carrying trays and taking orders. But something had changed. Guests approached her with compliments, some asking if she played professionally or if she performed elsewhere. She responded with modesty, simply saying she loved playing and enjoyed sharing her music when she could. The group who had challenged her earlier couldn't stop talking about the performance, still amazed at what they had just witnessed. Even as the night went on and the restaurant filled with chatter and laughter once more, there was a lingering energy in the air. The piano sat quietly in the corner, its keys still warm from her touch. For the waitress, it had been an unforgettable night. For the guests, it was a lesson in humility and the power of hidden talent. No one in that room would ever forget the moment when a quiet waitress, pushed to play a simple tune, revealed a gift that left everyone amazed. And for the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not just for her job, but for who she truly was. After the first tune, the restaurant seemed to carry a new energy. The small group of guests who had challenged the waitress were still leaning over their table, whispering to each other in disbelief. The soft clinking of cutlery and quiet conversations resumed around them, but their attention remained on her. She moved back to her usual duties, taking orders and serving plates, but she could feel their eyes following her. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, a mix of curiosity and respect. One of the guests, a young man with a kind smile, waved at her from across the room. He gestured toward the piano, silently asking if she would play again. She hesitated, glancing at her tray of drinks, then back at him. There was a moment of quiet consideration. She had not planned to play again so soon, but something in the way he looked, genuine admiration and encouragement, made her nod. She set the tray down carefully and walked to the piano once more. This time, she approached it with a little more confidence. The first notes were gentle, familiar, and smooth. She could feel the keys under her fingertips, and her mind began to focus entirely on the music. There was no nervousness, only a calm determination. The melody she began to play was simple at first, like a soft breeze moving through the room. But slowly she added more depth. Her fingers danced across the keys, creating harmonies that filled the space, making the walls of the restaurant seem to vibrate with emotion. Guests who were eating nearby began to pause, forks halfway to their mouths, as the music drew them in. The diners who had previously been chatting noisily fell silent. They didn't want to miss a single note. Each chord she played seemed to tell a story of patience, practice, and quiet dedication. There was a rhythm in her music that was both soothing and energizing. People leaned closer to listen, drawn in by the unexpected beauty of what was happening. The waitress, immersed in her music, felt a connection she rarely experienced in public. She was not just playing notes. She was expressing something deeply personal. She had practiced for years in solitude, sometimes feeling that no one would ever hear her play. But here, in this busy restaurant, under the warm lights, she was sharing a piece of herself in a way that felt real and honest. Each note carried her feelings, her experiences, and the quiet passion that had been with her for as long as she could remember. Some guests began to murmur among themselves, astonished by the complexity of the music. "I can't believe she plays like this," one said quietly. Another added, "She's amazing. I never expected this from someone working here." The word spread like a ripple, reaching more people in the restaurant. Even the staff, who were used to seeing her every day, were struck by her skill. They had known she played, but they had never witnessed such a performance, right there in the middle of the restaurant during a busy night. As she continued, her music grew more intricate. She began to experiment with rhythm and tempo, switching between soft, delicate passages and more forceful, dramatic sections. It was as if she was telling a story through her fingers, each movement carefully thought out, each note purposeful. Guests were leaning forward in their chairs, captivated. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling emotions they hadn't expected to feel in a casual dining space. A few children in the restaurant watched with wide eyes, fascinated by the movement of her hands and the sound coming from the piano. They had never heard anything like it before. The simple melody she had started with had blossomed into something that felt alive, something that seemed to move with its own heartbeat. The contrast between the bustling restaurant and the serenity of the music created a magical atmosphere. It was as if time had slowed down for a few moments, and everyone in the room shared a silent understanding of the beauty unfolding before them. The waitress noticed some guests subtly recording the performance on their phones. She didn't mind. In fact, it made her feel that the moment was important and worth sharing. Still, she focused entirely on the music, letting her emotions guide her hands. She remembered long hours of practice alone, the quiet nights when she had wondered if her talent would ever be seen, and she realized that this moment was more than just a performance. It was a connection between her and everyone in the room, a bridge built with melody and emotion. As the song progressed, the group who had initially teased her looked at each other in disbelief. Their laughter and jokes had completely disappeared. Now they were listening with rapt attention, moved by the depth and skill of her playing. They whispered to each other, acknowledging how wrong they had been to assume she could not perform. The young man who had waved her over earlier looked genuinely impressed, shaking his head slightly, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I didn't think she would be like this," he murmured. The music began to build toward a gentle crescendo. She added subtle variations in dynamics, soft notes followed by louder, more expressive ones. Her ability to control the piano so precisely amazed everyone. The room, once filled with chatter and laughter, was now held in a shared moment of awe and admiration. Waiters paused in the aisles, diners put down their utensils, and even the kitchen staff seemed to listen in for a few moments, caught in the spell of her playing. When the song finally began to wind down, she returned to a soft, delicate ending, letting the final notes linger in the air. The silence that followed was almost tangible, as if the room itself had been holding its breath. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, soft at first, then stronger and more insistent. Some guests were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Others simply smiled, deeply touched by what they had just experienced. The music had not only entertained them, it had moved them in a way that few experiences could. The waitress stood, her fingers brushing the last notes, and took a small, humble bow. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, not from embarrassment but from the intensity of the experience. She had shared a part of herself that few had ever seen, and the response from the room made her heart swell. She felt proud, not in a boastful way, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had touched people through something she loved. The group who had challenged her earlier approached her, their expressions a mix of awe and apology. "We didn't think you could play like that," one said softly. Another added, "You're incredible. We were wrong to doubt you." She smiled politely, accepting their compliments without arrogance. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about sharing her gift, and in that moment, it had been enough. Other guests came forward, asking questions and offering praise. Some asked if she played professionally or if she gave lessons. She explained simply that she had loved playing for many years, but her work as a waitress kept her busy. Her humility only made her performance more impressive in the eyes of those who had witnessed it. They could see that her talent was genuine, and her modesty made it even more admirable. The atmosphere of the restaurant had changed completely. What had started as a playful challenge had become an unforgettable experience. Guests who had been strangers to each other were now connected by the music, sharing glances and smiles of appreciation. The waitress returned to her duties, carrying trays and taking orders, but there was a new sense of respect in the room. People treated her not just as a server, but as someone special, someone who had surprised them with a hidden brilliance. Even after she finished her second piece, some guests lingered near the piano, hoping she might play again. She nodded politely, promising to play whenever she had a chance. But for now, she returned to her work. The night went on, but the memory of her performance lingered in the minds of everyone present. They had come expecting a quiet dinner, a casual evening, but instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. As the restaurant started to empty toward the late hours, the waitress took a moment to reflect on what had happened. The applause, the awe, the surprised faces of the guests. It had all been a powerful reminder of why she loved playing the piano. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about connection, about touching people through music. She had given them a gift without even realizing how much it would mean, and in return, they had given her a sense of fulfillment and appreciation that she would remember for a long time. She knew that this night would stay with her. The guests would talk about it for weeks, perhaps share videos with friends and family, but more importantly, she had experienced a moment where her talent, her passion, and her heart had come together in perfect harmony. It was a night where a simple act, responding to a playful challenge, had transformed into something beautiful and unforgettable, and she would continue to play, quietly and humbly, ready for the next moment when she could share her music and leave people amazed once again. The next day, the restaurant felt different. The staff went about their usual tasks, but there was a sense of quiet excitement in the air. People who had been at the restaurant the previous night were talking about the performance they had witnessed. Some had shared videos on social media, while others had called friends to tell them about the incredible pianist who worked as a waitress. Word was spreading quickly, and the staff couldn't help but feel proud of the young woman who had surprised everyone. She arrived early for her shift, carrying a small bag with her uniform and a sheet of music tucked carefully inside. She was calm but carried a quiet anticipation. The previous night's performance had been special, and though she hadn't expected so much attention, she felt ready to play again if asked. She liked the idea of sharing her music, of giving people a moment of beauty in the middle of their ordinary lives. As she prepared the restaurant for the morning crowd, she noticed a few familiar faces entering. The group of guests who had encouraged her to play were back, this time for brunch. They waved at her, smiling widely. She nodded politely, acknowledging them, and returned to her work. Their presence reminded her of the night before and the surprising turn of events. It was strange to feel both nervous and excited, knowing that people were eager to hear her play again. Soon, the restaurant began filling up. The usual customers came in, greeting the staff, ordering their favorite dishes, and chatting with friends. Amid the buzz of conversation, the piano in the corner seemed almost to call to her. She glanced at it, thinking about the melodies she could play, the stories she could tell through the keys. There was a quiet thrill in knowing that her music had touched people so deeply the night before. During the mid-morning rush, a small child approached her table. The child's parents had been sitting nearby the previous night and had heard her play. The little boy looked up at her with wide eyes. "Can you play the piano again?" he asked shyly. She smiled, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. "Of course," she said softly. "I'll play a little tune for you." His face lit up, and he clapped his hands in delight, running back to his parents to tell them the good news. She walked to the piano once more, pulling out the bench and sitting down. This time, there was no sense of hesitation. She placed her fingers on the keys and let her mind focus entirely on the music. The first notes she played were soft and gentle, almost like a whisper. The melody was simple, soothing, and familiar. But as she continued, she began to add layers, subtle harmonies that gave depth to the tune. The music filled the restaurant, blending with the soft chatter and the clatter of dishes, creating a magical atmosphere. Guests started to pause, noticing the sound. They looked around, curious, and then gradually realized that it was the waitress from the night before playing again. Their eyes widened in recognition, and some began to whisper excitedly to each other. A few people who had missed her performance the previous night leaned in closer, eager to witness her talent for the first time. Her fingers moved with confidence and grace. The music was no longer just a melody. It was a story, one that unfolded naturally with each note. She played with emotion, allowing the piano to speak for her. There was a rhythm in her performance that seemed effortless, yet each note was precise, deliberate, and full of life. The room grew quiet, as guests became fully absorbed in the sound. Some staff members paused in their work to listen. They had known she was talented, but hearing her play in this moment was extraordinary. There was a sense of pride and admiration in the way they watched her, realizing that she had something truly special. The music had a calming effect on everyone, even those who had entered the restaurant in a hurry or were stressed from their day. For a few minutes, the world outside seemed to disappear, and the piano became the center of everyone's attention. As the song progressed, she began to explore more complex patterns, weaving together different tones and dynamics. The melody rose and fell, soft and gentle one moment, bold and dramatic the next. Guests were captivated, some leaning forward, eyes wide, while others closed their eyes, letting the music carry them away. It was as if she had transformed the restaurant into a concert hall, where every note mattered and every pause was filled with meaning. The child from earlier sat near the piano, clapping softly along with the rhythm. His parents smiled, touched by the beauty of the performance and the joy on their child's face. Other diners, initially there for a simple meal, were now fully engaged in the music, whispering to each other about the incredible talent they were witnessing. They had come for breakfast or lunch, but they were leaving with a memory that would stay with them for a long time. The group of guests who had challenged her the night before were particularly enthralled. They had not expected the performance to be this captivating. They exchanged glances, their earlier playful teasing replaced with genuine admiration. One of them murmured, "She's amazing. I can't believe we underestimated her." Another nodded, adding, "It's like she's telling a story without words." She continued to play, fully absorbed in the music. Each note was intentional, each chord a reflection of her experience and dedication. The audience felt the emotion behind the performance, the years of practice, the quiet determination, and the passion that had driven her to master the piano. It was clear that her talent was more than skill. It was a form of expression, a way to communicate feelings that words could not capture. As she neared the end of the piece, she gradually softened the notes, bringing the melody to a gentle close. The last note lingered in the air, almost like a sigh, and for a moment, the restaurant was completely silent. Guests held their breath, reluctant to break the spell. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, soft at first, then stronger, more insistent. The sound filled the room, echoing off the walls and reaching into every corner. She stood, smiling softly, acknowledging the applause with a polite nod. Her cheeks were tinged with warmth, not from embarrassment, but from the joy of sharing something she loved and seeing the positive impact it had on others. The guests who had challenged her earlier approached, offering compliments and words of praise. She accepted them with humility, grateful for the recognition but not seeking it. Throughout the rest of her shift, the atmosphere in the restaurant remained vibrant. Guests talked excitedly about her performance, some replaying videos they had recorded on their phones. People who had never interacted with her before came by to express their admiration and ask if she played professionally. She explained simply that she loved to play, but her work as a waitress kept her busy. Her modesty only enhanced the impression she left on those who witnessed her talent. Even as the day went on and the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, the impact of her performance lingered. People continued to discuss the music, and new guests arrived, curious to see if the stories they had heard were true. The waitress moved through her duties with quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had shared a part of herself in a meaningful way. Her music had connected with people, created a shared experience, and left a lasting impression. By the time the lunch crowd began to thin, she had returned to the piano once more, this time for a small, intimate performance for a few remaining guests. The music was softer, more personal, almost like a conversation. She allowed herself to fully enjoy the moment, feeling the connection with the listeners and the sense of fulfillment that came from expressing herself through the piano. It was a reminder of why she had spent so many years practicing, why she had devoted herself to music even when no one else could see her talent. As the day came to a close, the guests who had witnessed her performances throughout the morning and afternoon left the restaurant with smiles on their faces, talking animatedly about the extraordinary waitress who could play the piano so beautifully. They would remember this day, not just for the meal they had enjoyed, but for the unexpected gift of music that had transformed an ordinary restaurant into a place of wonder and inspiration. The waitress cleaned up, tidying the restaurant and putting the piano back in its quiet corner. She reflected on the day, feeling a sense of pride and happiness. She had shared her music, touched hearts, and reminded people that talent can be found in the most unexpected places. It was a day she would never forget, and it was only the beginning of a journey that would continue to surprise both her and those who had the chance to hear her play. She knew that her music could bring joy, inspire others, and create moments of magic in ordinary lives, and she was ready for whatever came next. She felt a mixture of sorrow and inspiration, recognizing the strength it took to maintain love in the face of adversity. The letters also contained moments of joy and humor, tiny glimpses into ordinary life that made her smile. They described shared meals, walks in the park, and playful conversations. These details made the story feel real and grounded, not just a romantic fantasy but a life lived with care, attention, and affection. She felt connected to the lovers through these small moments, understanding that love is often found in the simplest gestures, the everyday acts that create meaning and connection. As she continued to read, she began to notice patterns in the letters. Certain phrases, words, and expressions repeated, showing the depth of their feelings and the consistency of their emotions over time. She realized that the letters were not just a record of events but a reflection of enduring commitment, a proof that love could survive challenges, distance, and time. She felt moved, inspired by the resilience and dedication that had been captured in these pages. The piano remained central to her experience. She practiced the melodies described in the letters, pressing each key carefully, imagining the notes as messages between the lovers. The music brought the letters to life, transforming words into sound, emotion, and memory. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that by playing these tunes, she was honoring the past and connecting with something timeless and universal. The piano was no longer just an old instrument. It was a storyteller, a keeper of history, and a bridge between generations. In quiet moments, she would sit alone at the piano, reading letters aloud and playing melodies simultaneously. The experience was immersive, transporting her to another time, another world, yet one that felt close and real. She felt as though she could hear the voices of the lovers, the laughter, the whispers, and the music. The room seemed to echo with their presence, and she understood that she had become a part of the story, a custodian of memories that had survived for decades. The letters inspired her to think about the meaning of love and connection in her own life. She realized that the smallest acts of care, attention, and expression could leave a lasting mark. The lovers had found ways to communicate and maintain their bond despite obstacles, and their story had endured because of the sincerity and depth of their feelings. She felt grateful for the opportunity to witness this story, to learn from it, and to carry its lessons forward in her own life. She began to plan how she might share the story with others while respecting its privacy and intimacy. She thought about creating a small display at the community center, showing the letters and the piano as a way to honor the past and inspire others. She wanted people to understand that even ordinary objects and quiet moments can hold extraordinary stories, waiting to be discovered by someone willing to look and care. She felt a sense of purpose and excitement, knowing that the story could touch many hearts and remind people of the beauty of human connection. The piano and the letters had changed her perspective on life, teaching her to notice the small things, to appreciate the emotions behind actions, and to recognize the power of love and resilience. She felt a growing respect for history, for the stories that objects can hold, and for the people who had left traces of their lives for future generations to discover. The experience was transformative, leaving her with a sense of wonder, responsibility, and inspiration. Even as she finished arranging the letters and playing the piano, she knew that her journey was far from over. The story was still unfolding in her mind, and she understood that she had a role in keeping it alive. She felt a deep connection to the lovers, to their emotions, and to the piano itself. The hidden love story had revealed itself to her, and she knew that it would continue to inspire, teach, and move those who took the time to listen. It was a reminder that love, in all its forms, can endure, leaving a legacy that lasts far beyond a single lifetime. The next few days were a whirlwind for the restaurant. More people had come to hear about the waitress who could play the piano, and the atmosphere had changed noticeably. Guests would enter with excitement, whispering to each other about the performance they hoped to witness. Some regulars had returned multiple times just to hear her play, and new visitors were curious to see what the buzz was all about. The staff was busier than ever, managing the growing crowd, but everyone seemed energized by the shared excitement. The waitress arrived early, carrying her calm demeanor with her, but inside, she felt a quiet anticipation. Each day brought a new set of listeners, and she wanted to make each performance special. She prepared herself by reviewing some of her favorite pieces in her mind, thinking about the melodies she wanted to share and the emotions she hoped to convey. She had learned that music was more than just notes. It was a way to connect, to tell stories without words, and she was ready to do that once again. As the restaurant filled, she noticed many faces from previous performances. Some were returning guests, eager to see her play again, while others were new, having heard about her from friends or seen videos online. The energy in the room was different from before. There was a mix of excitement, curiosity, and anticipation, and she could feel it as she moved through the tables, taking orders and serving food. During a brief lull in the rush, a small group of guests approached her. One of them spoke up politely. "We heard you play the piano before. Would you mind performing for us?" She smiled, recognizing the opportunity to share her music again. "Of course," she replied softly, walking toward the piano with her usual quiet confidence. She sat on the bench, feeling the familiar smooth keys beneath her fingers. The first notes were soft and gentle, a simple melody to welcome the listeners. Gradually, she added depth, weaving harmonies and subtle variations that brought the piece to life. The music flowed naturally, filling the room with a sense of calm and wonder. Guests paused their conversations, entranced by the beauty of the sound. As she played, more diners turned their attention toward her. Some leaned forward in curiosity, while others closed their eyes, letting the music transport them. The melody grew richer, evolving into a more complex arrangement. Each note was deliberate, yet full of emotion, as if she were telling a story with her hands. The audience could feel the passion behind her playing, and it moved them in ways they hadn't anticipated. The children in the restaurant watched with wide eyes, fascinated by the movement of her fingers and the magic of the sound. One of them whispered to a parent, "She's amazing." The parent smiled, nodding in agreement. The music had a calming effect, yet it was powerful enough to capture everyone's attention. Even the staff, busy with their tasks, found themselves stealing glances, captivated by her performance. Her hands moved with precision and grace, the music ebbing and flowing with emotion. She experimented with rhythm and dynamics, creating a performance that was both technical and deeply expressive. Guests were drawn into the story she was telling through her fingers, connecting with the feelings she poured into each note. There was an unspoken understanding between the pianist and the listeners, a shared experience that transcended words. Some of the returning guests whispered to each other, amazed by her talent. "I can't believe she plays like this," one said softly. Another added, "It's incredible how she makes the piano speak. It's like she's sharing a part of herself." Their admiration was sincere, and it spread to others nearby. New visitors who hadn't seen her before were quickly caught up in the performance, recognizing the extraordinary skill and emotion behind each note. As the song progressed, she began to explore more intricate passages, moving from soft, tender phrases to bold, dramatic sections. The music was alive, each chord resonating through the room and touching the hearts of those listening. Guests were fully engaged, leaning forward, closing their eyes, and feeling the power of her playing. It was clear that she was not just performing for attention. She was sharing a piece of her soul through the piano. The group who had first challenged her was present again, and their reactions had changed from playful teasing to genuine awe. They whispered to each other in admiration, acknowledging that they had underestimated her. One of them murmured, "We had no idea she was this talented." Another nodded, adding, "It's like the music is alive. I can feel it in my chest." Their words reflected the transformation in perception that had taken place since the first performance. As she neared the climax of the piece, the music swelled, building tension and emotion. The notes moved gracefully, rising and falling, creating a sense of anticipation and wonder. Guests were fully captivated, some holding their breath, others tapping gently along with the rhythm. The performance created a shared sense of awe and admiration, connecting everyone in the restaurant through the power of music. When the final notes faded, there was a brief silence, as if the room itself was holding its breath, reluctant to break the spell. Then applause erupted, soft at first, and quickly growing louder. Guests stood, clapping enthusiastically, expressing their genuine appreciation. The waitress rose from the piano, smiling modestly, acknowledging the applause with a gentle nod. She felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that her music had touched so many hearts. The audience approached her afterward, offering words of praise and admiration. They asked if she played professionally or if she gave lessons. She explained that she had been playing for many years and loved sharing her music, but her work as a waitress kept her busy. Her humility added to the impression she left on the guests, making them respect not just her talent but her character. Even as the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, the impact of her performance lingered. People continued to discuss the music, replaying videos and sharing stories about the experience. Guests who had been strangers before were now connected through the memory of the performance, creating a sense of community and shared wonder. The waitress moved through her duties with quiet satisfaction, knowing that her talent had created a lasting impression on those who had witnessed it. Before the evening ended, she returned to the piano one last time. Her fingers brushed the keys lightly, playing a soft, reflective melody. The room was quieter now, most guests preparing to leave, but she allowed herself to enjoy the moment. She reflected on the past few days, the faces of the audience, and the emotions her music had stirred. It was a reminder that her talent was not just for herself but for others, and that sharing it could create memories that would last far beyond the restaurant. As she finally stood and returned to her duties, she felt a sense of accomplishment and gratitude. The piano sat quietly in the corner, still warm from her touch, as if resting after the beautiful music it had produced. She knew that more performances would come, and that each one would be an opportunity to touch hearts and inspire those who listened. The journey of sharing her music was just beginning, and she was ready to embrace every moment, quietly and gracefully, leaving a trail of amazement wherever she played. The following week, the restaurant seemed almost transformed. Guests were coming in not just for the food but for the experience of hearing the waitress play the piano. Word had spread far and wide, and people were curious to witness the young woman who had amazed everyone with her talent. The staff was busier than ever, yet there was a sense of excitement and pride in the air. Everyone knew that something extraordinary had become a regular part of the restaurant. The waitress arrived early for her shift, carrying the quiet confidence that had grown within her over the past days. She prepared herself for the busy service ahead, but also for the possibility that she would be asked to play. The piano sat quietly in its corner, polished and ready, almost as if it had been waiting for her to return. She felt a calm anticipation, knowing that her music had the power to change the atmosphere, to create moments of awe and joy. As she walked through the dining area, she noticed familiar faces and new guests alike. Some were regulars who had returned to see her play again, while others had heard about her through videos or recommendations. The buzz of conversation was interspersed with excited glances toward the piano. She smiled politely at the children who waved, their eyes full of wonder, and continued her preparations for the day. During the lunch hour, a small group of guests approached her with a request. "Would you play something for us?" one of them asked. She nodded, accepting the opportunity without hesitation. Walking to the piano, she felt a mixture of anticipation and joy. She sat down, allowing her fingers to find their place on the keys, feeling the familiar touch that brought her comfort and inspiration. The first notes she played were soft, inviting, and soothing. The melody flowed naturally, like a gentle river moving through the restaurant. Guests paused in their conversations, ears turning toward the sound. Some leaned forward with curiosity, others closed their eyes, absorbing the music as if it carried a story meant only for them. The waitress allowed herself to be fully present, letting her emotions guide each note. The melody grew, evolving with delicate harmonies that added richness and depth. The rhythm shifted subtly, creating a natural ebb and flow. Each chord she played was intentional, filled with feeling, and each note connected with the audience on a personal level. People were captivated, drawn into the music, and unconsciously leaning closer to listen. The energy in the room shifted from ordinary dining to a shared, almost magical experience. The children were mesmerized, pointing at her fingers as they moved across the keys. One of them whispered, "She's amazing." The parents smiled, watching the wonder on their children's faces. Even the staff, busy with their tasks, occasionally paused to listen. Everyone could sense that this was more than just music. It was a connection, a story, and a shared moment of beauty. As the performance continued, she began to explore more intricate patterns. The music flowed between gentle, tender phrases and bold, expressive passages. The audience could feel the emotion behind every note, understanding that the skill she displayed was matched by the passion she poured into the performance. Guests were fully engaged, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, letting the music fill their senses. The group who had initially challenged her returned once again, sitting in quiet awe. Their expressions had changed completely. The playful teasing from before was gone, replaced by deep admiration. One whispered to a friend, "We underestimated her completely. She's extraordinary." Another nodded, adding, "Every note is like a story. I feel like I'm part of it." Their recognition of her talent reflected a transformation not just in perception, but in respect for the dedication and emotion she brought to the piano. The music reached its climax, a beautiful crescendo of harmonies and dynamics. The notes rose and fell gracefully, guiding the audience through an emotional journey. Guests were mesmerized, some holding their breath in anticipation, others gently tapping along with the rhythm. The performance created a sense of unity, as everyone in the restaurant was connected through the shared experience of music. As the piece neared its end, she softened the notes, letting the melody fade gently, like a sigh. For a moment, the restaurant was completely silent, everyone holding their breath, reluctant to break the spell. Then, gradually, applause began, soft at first, and then louder and more enthusiastic. Guests stood, clapping and cheering, expressing genuine admiration and gratitude for the performance they had witnessed. The waitress rose from the piano, smiling warmly, acknowledging the applause with a humble nod. Afterward, guests approached her to offer praise and compliments. They asked if she played professionally or gave lessons, expressing amazement at her talent and dedication. She explained simply that she had loved playing for many years, but her work as a waitress had kept her busy. Her modesty only increased the admiration she received, as it was clear that her motivation was love for music and the joy of sharing it, rather than recognition. Throughout the evening, the atmosphere in the restaurant remained vibrant. Guests discussed the performance, sharing videos and recounting their favorite moments. People who had been strangers were now connected through the shared experience of music. The waitress moved through her duties with calm confidence, aware that her music had created memories that would linger long after they left. She understood the power of her talent to inspire, uplift, and create connections in unexpected ways. Toward the end of the night, she returned to the piano one final time. Her fingers brushed the keys lightly, producing a soft, reflective melody. The room was quieter now, but a few lingering guests listened intently. She allowed herself to enjoy the moment, reflecting on the journey of the past days, the challenges, the surprises, and the connections she had formed. The music was her gift, and in sharing it, she had touched hearts, inspired joy, and created a lasting impression on everyone who had heard her play. As she stood and returned to her work, she felt a sense of fulfillment and gratitude. The piano sat quietly in the corner, its polished surface gleaming under the soft lights. She knew that more performances would come, each one an opportunity to share her passion and leave an impact. The journey of sharing her music was far from over, and she was ready to embrace every moment, quietly and gracefully, leaving a trail of amazement wherever she played. That night, as the restaurant emptied and the lights dimmed, she took a moment to sit alone at the piano. She let her fingers wander across the keys, playing a melody that was hers alone, a reflection of her thoughts and emotions. In the quiet, she realized that her journey as both a waitress and a pianist had brought her to a place she had never imagined. She had discovered the joy of sharing her music with others, and the unexpected magic that came from doing something she loved. She stood, taking one last look at the piano before leaving for the night. The experience of the past days had taught her that talent could be hidden in the most ordinary places, and that sharing it could create extraordinary moments. She walked out of the restaurant with a quiet smile, knowing that each day offered a new opportunity to touch hearts and inspire others with the gift of music. The story of the waitress and her piano would continue, leaving a lasting mark on everyone who had the privilege of witnessing her talent.